food carbon political leader, has been leading the charge on this particular issue. She has blasted the government as it relates to the food card wars. And I have seen headlines in the newspapers that has gone soft or attempt to provide a soft landing for the government when they have said, it has stated, food card fumble and food card challenges. Declare, or the writing is on the wall, if a prime minister who is in charge of a government into its 9th year, its second term of governing Trinidad and Tobago, and they cannot get food card distribution right, then God help us. It is a question of a crisis in leadership, no understanding or no compassion, a lack of care of what this simple food card means to single mothers, persons who have been retrenched, persons who have been finding difficulty in finding jobs and so on within this economy that continues to contract. And the minister has come forward with a very half-baked approach, Minister Cox, to tell the country that the ministry is working with banks to rectify the glitches. They are late with the food cards. So it tells you that there is no planning, no level of leadership from the Prime Minister, no direction. If the Prime Minister had any care for the vulnerable, the poor and dispossessed who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these food cards, since the beginning of the year or in mid-year, he would have told Minister Cox, Minister Cox, do we have everything in place to ensure that food cards are distributed in a very timely manner and timely fashion in 2023 for Christmas? That is the responsibility of a Prime Minister in addressing the needs of the poor, the dispossessed, the vulnerable in our society. And we in the opposition, we have to take them to task, because my colleagues, we have been inundated with calls from recipients of these cards. So in addition to distributing these cards late, now when recipients go to the supermarkets or points of redemption, they have now been subjected to embarrassment, where they have to leave all the food, all that they purchase at the cashiers and counters and so on, people looking at them in awe, wanting to know if some kind of scam they're involved in and so on, when really it is the incompetence of the government, and they're seeking some kind of redress and excuse and telling you, well, now we're working with the banks to repair the glitches and so on. If they had any care for the poor, the vulnerable, and the recipients, these shortcomings would have been addressed, it would have been put in place, and in the tenure of the People's Partnership government led by Kamla Prasad Bisesa, this kind of incompetence, this kind of what we would call lack of leadership never came to the fore between 2010 and 2015. And that is why we are saying that there is no compassion, lack of care, no understanding of how the poor, the vulnerable, and unemployed should be treated at this time. And also, in the budget 2024, the Minister of Finance and the government, big song and dance in the parliament, minimum wage to be moved to $20.50 per hour, and the Minister of Finance and every one of them during the budget presentation patting themselves on the back, making it apparent that, or trying to create this narrative that it is the only government in Trinidad and Tobago that has addressed the minimum wage. I want to tell the country this morning, today, that it was the government of Kamala Prasad Bisasa that raised the minimum wage on 2 occasions when we were the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And today, I want to put into the public domain and in the public record, which continues to show a lack of care for those who are supposed to be the recipients of this increase in the minimum wage, because the minimum wage come the 1st of January 2024 is supposed to go up to $20.50 per hour. And this memorandum comes from the Office of the General Manager of Operations out of the Northwest Regional Health Authority under the broad heading to all security providers from the General Manager of Operations dated the 15th of December 2023, subject annulment of increased rates for security providers. And it reads, reference is made to the above captioned subject at the Minister of Health monthly meeting dated the 3rd of October 2023, where all RHA executives and all security support operational managers were invited. Minister Dialsingh, I want to reiterate, Minister Dialsingh in his address indicated that there will be no funding, there will be no additional funding allocated to security services, and no increased rates will be acknowledged at this time. And in light of this, the Northwest Regional Health Authority will not be accepting any increased rates. So what Minister Dialsingh has instructed the North Central Regional Health Authority is to tell them that the security providers, if they tell you that they want more money to deal with or to facilitate the implementation of the minimum wage, and it is a known fact in Trinidad and Tobago that all and sundry in the security industry, they are paid in and around the minimum wage. What he has said is that if security providers seek to pay their workers the increase in the minimum wage, it will not be facilitated, or it will not be paid, or it will not be honored by the North Central Regional Health Authority. And today, when I look at the directors involved at the Northwest Regional Health Authority, there's a lady by the name of one Lisa Agard, the chairperson of this Northwest Regional Health Authority, Northwest Region. And apparently this lady is so well politically connected that she simply cannot vanish from the compound. Whether it is at Massey Communication, whether it is at TSTT, whether it is at Amplia, whether it is with your personal data being hacked and so on, this lady is somewhere on the compound. And today, this to me sends a very clear message from the Minister of Health, Lisa Agard and so on. They have no care about the implementation of the minimum wage, and today we are asking the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, is this the position of your government as it relates to the implementation of the minimum wage? No care about poor people, song and dance, public relations telling you that the minimum wage will be increased, and in reality there is no supplementary funding to deal with this increase. And will this be the government's position not only at the Northwest Regional Health Authority, but at the North Central Regional, at the Southwest Regional and so on? These are the questions. And will it be across the board in relation to the government's ability to honor and pay the minimum wage in relation to what is the approach in relation to poor people? And this theme of a lack of care for the poor and the vulnerable and the oppressed in our society continues, and it is clear that they are not about the small man and the ordinary man in the society. And the United National Congress has been out in front. We, through our political leader and all of my colleagues, we have warned the country, we have advised the country that the appointment of Her Excellency Christine Kala Kangalu to the office of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, we were very concerned from the outset about the political ties, the possibility of nepotism, the possibility of favoritism coming into play, and talk has been rife throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, because the opposition was of the firm view that for Her Excellency to assume or to be elevated to this position, this prestigious position, it was clearly one of being too aligned to the government, because Her Excellency would have served in the capacity as the President of the Senate. The President served also as the Minister of Legal Affairs, the Minister of Science, Technology, and Tertiary Education. And during her political career, she was at the forefront in espousing that the gospel of the PNM must be rooted in every household throughout the length and breadth of this country. The gospel of the PNM must be the gospel of Trinidad and Tobago. That was the mantra of Her Excellency. And today, we continue to be concerned about the possibility of nepotism, favoritism, and the whole question of the conflict of interest as it relates to the role of the First Gentleman. The First Gentleman, we have been advised through documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act documents that the First Gentleman received approximately $14.25 million in state briefs, $7.25 million from the Ministry of the Attorney General, $2.5 million for representing WASA, $922,000 at Petrotrin, and the list goes on and on, with a sum of also $2.147 million coming from the Housing Development Corporation for legal briefs. And we are saying to Trinidad and Tobago that in the interest of good governance, so long as this gentleman continues to occupy the very distinguished position of being the First Gentleman, he must reject, he must no longer seek or no longer solicit any state briefs from ministries, state enterprises, and statutory authorities throughout Trinidad and Tobago, because the United National Congress is of the firm view and opinion that he is conflicted, that the office of the President and the First Gentleman must be totally independent and in no way connected to the political directorate. The First Gentleman must cease benefiting from what we would term political largesse and the political largesse of his spouse, who occupies the very prestigious and distinguished role of being Her Excellency, the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. If this continues to be the order of the day, there can be no independence, no separation of powers, and the UNC will continue to conclude that the gospel of the PNM, has now taken over President's House, and the gospel of the PNM will continue to be influenced. This mantra will influence the allocation of state briefs as it relates to the largest that is being given or being provided to or being facilitated to through the office of the First Gentleman. And today we call upon the First Gentleman, in the interest of good governance and the highest principles of integrity in public office and public life, to reject all state briefs or put all possible work on hold as it relates to being the beneficiary of state briefs from government ministries, state enterprises, and statutory authorities and so on. And this leads us to the very important issue of the non-renewal of the contract of the former president of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago, Mrs. Deborah Thomas Felix. The Industrial Court is a superior court of record. It is a court that preserves and ensures that there is industrial relation stability in Trinidad and Tobago. It encompasses two important stakeholders in the context of employers, employees, the labor movement, workers in the informal economy, and also in the context of social dialogue, the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And since the non-renewal of the contract of Mrs. Deborah Thomas Felix, speculation is rife. There has been concern, conspiracy theories, and there have been a number of voices as it relates to word on the ground and town is saying that the manner in which Mrs. Deborah Thomas Felix was relieved of her appointment one day before the end of her tenure. She was attending a meeting of the International Labour Organization Committee of Experts. She was out of the country. She received a telephone call informing her one day before the expiration of her contract. The way and the manner it was done has shades of how Her Excellency, when she served for a short period acting as president, and used that short period to dismiss the former governor of the central bank, one would recall Jawala Rambaran, and one would recall that Jawala Rambaran took the Minister of Finance to court and won. And others have expressed concern whether a senior cabinet minister whose wife was a sitting judge at the Industrial Court, and the president or the former president was concerned about the performance of this judge. It is alleged that there were shortcomings and so on. Whether this senior cabinet minister led a witch hunt to ensure that the former president was not reappointed to this position. Was the advice of the former president as it relates to the government's move to decertify the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association and the Trinidad and Tobago Airline Pilots Association, TALPA, work against the former president of the Industrial Court? One has to ask the question also, did the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, in making the recommendation and so on, took into consideration that the former president spoke out against the government's trust, their illegal trust, to impose mandatory vaccination in the public sector during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, the owners and directors of big business in Trinidad and Tobago play a role in eliminating her from benefiting from the renewal from the renewal or for the renewal of another term, because a number of stakeholders in big business had over time expressed their annoyance with the court, and in one particular domain it was said that the court was responsible for decreasing the levels of productivity and had become too worker friendly and so on. Was this action part of spreading the gospel of the PNM, and this action ensuring that the gospel of the PNM is now firmly rooted in and entrenched at Balize House, at President's House, sorry, and was the non-renewal of this contract, of Mrs. Deborah Thomas Felix's contract, to strengthen the government's hand in undermining the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. The country was warned that we were afraid that Her Excellency would become a puppet to the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and this is why we are calling upon Her Excellency to provide clarity, to provide the necessary transparency, so that we can all conclude that Her Excellency is not a puppet of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And now I will now turn to the very important issue of occupational safety and health in the workplace. As I said, occupational safety and health in the workplace has collapsed. It is non-existent under Minister McClatchy. The Occupational Safety and Health Agency has been reduced to what we would call a political tool. It lacks independence. And in fact, because I have come to this conclusion, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Chapter 8808, applies to all industrial establishments, including such as industrial establishments owned or occupied by the state of Trinidad and Tobago. And there is an OSH agency established under this piece of legislation which has the responsibility to perform such acts and functions in accordance with the law, to enforce the provisions of this act in every workplace throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. And under Minister McClatchy, the deaths of the 4 divers occurred at Paria. The deaths of workers while doing jobs in the private sector. One Keith Scott died while on the job at Santa Rosa Limeworks Limited. This was on the 13th of August 2020. Man dies in work accident. Family wants answers. TNTech investigating electrocution accident in Shagwanas and so on. And today we have been told that one Keegan Castle, an employee working for a contractor engaged at Movietown in Vedas Bay, not Movietown the Cineplex, Movietown in Vedas Bay, was electrocuted, and he was working for a contractor. And today I asked Mr. Jervis Warner and the chairman of Massey, Mr. Robert Riley, if indeed this Keegan Castle who died, to clear the air on whether he was working on a project that falls under the aegis or jurisdiction of Massey Limited. You see, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, they care nothing about poor people, because they continue to hide behind the veil of private sector, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Labour, the Minister of Trade and Industry told my colleague in the Senate recently, as it relates to the OSH report into the death of Alan Lane Ramkisoon, an employee of Massey Energies Limited. She told my colleague that that report will not be made public. So the explosion report at NICON, that has never been made public. Up till today, we do not know if the OSH agency gave a permit to resume work operations. The death into Alan Lane Ramkisoon at NICON, that is being withheld from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We are now being told when Kurt Etienne died in a trench collapsed on him at working for WASA, we do not know where that report is. And also today, we continue to demand the United National Congress, based on the track record of this government of hiding behind confidentiality and hiding behind the veil of the laws and so on. We are saying to the government of Trinidad and Tobago again, we want a definitive date, Prime Minister, when the Paria report, that report compiled by King's Counsel Jerome Lynch, who told the country that that accident was not an act of God. It was not an accident. We want to know from you when a definitive date. We demand a public statement from you when that report will be made public and delayed in the Parliament. We are demanding nothing less than the full report. We will reject any sanitized report, because in the interest of the public and taxpayers who have to foot a bill in excess of $15 million, there must be an immediate public view of its contents. We must never forget that this government never wanted a commission of inquiry. They appointed a committee, was conflicted. One of the members, one Eugene Tia, he was in a legal relationship with the Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs. Today we are saying that it is of paramount importance that the Commission findings and recommendations on the complex range of health and safety issues that arise from the deaths of Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Nagesa, it must be made public. Such an accident must never reoccur in the workplace, and this is why the government cannot continue to dilly-dally. Work continues at Paria, and in the energy sector, and stakeholders must be able to benefit from the report as it relates to how the absence of regulation for high-risk commercial diving should be addressed. Paria should be the first and foremost entity in the country calling for this report so that they could address the absence of regulation for high-risk commercial diving. That is of critical importance. And also, where is the potential for recompense to the families whose providers died in that pipeline? This Prime Minister should be concerned about the lives of the ordinary four-person, in terms of the survivors, their families, and that of Christopher Budram. We are coming to, in February of 2024, it will be 2 years since this tragedy occurred. And this is why we are saying in the UNC, based on their track record, we are very concerned that this report may be suppressed. Our intelligence, our sources are telling us that there is a conspiracy afoot at the level of the cabinet to suppress this report, because the findings can implicate friends and financiers of the People's National Movement government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, and our information is telling us that the report will crucify them, it will implicate them, it will bury them, and based on that, they are trying to buy time, they are buying time, and that is why we are saying, because our sources are telling us that they want to suppress this report until the general elections are called. So when the general elections are called, they want that to take place, and they do not want the country to know what is happening or what happened in that report or that accident, who is culpable, who has to pay, and who should face criminal prosecution through the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So that is the state of play as it relates to health and safety. It is very clear that the government of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his entire cabinet has no care, no empathy, no lack of compassion for the poor, the vulnerable, and the oppressed in our society. And that is why we are saying, with a general elections on the horizon, do not allow them to deceive you, to betray you, to come in 2024 and act in such a manner that it will be a year of deception and deflection, and you will continue to fall victim to their lies and betrayal. Enough is enough. The UNC under Kamla Persad-Bissessar will stand in defense of the working class in 2024 and beyond. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, the Honorable Rujonarinda Singh, for your comprehensive discourse, presentation on fundamental issues affecting, confronting, and facing the poor, the downtrodden, and the working people of our nation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my brothers and sisters, 3 days before Christmas and some 9 days before the end of 2023, the working people of Trinidad and Tobago continue to reel under the relentless assault and attack by this Rowley-led administration, who has absolutely no care in the world for their well-being and their living conditions. They have been crippled and brutalized through higher prices, through rising unemployment and underemployment, in spite of what the CSO may say. They are faced, brothers and sisters, with rising poverty, growing income inequality, and wealth disparity. And the government just does not care. They just don't care, brothers and sisters. Today, we will address some very important issues. We know that the economy continues to reel in crisis. But there are some areas that are of concern to the people of our country. And we want to look at those areas today. we want to look at the Massey fiasco and the misuse of our scarce foreign exchange by Massey. We also want to take a look at some of the unanswered questions surrounding the Dragon gas deal. And of course, we want to pay attention to the continued oppression by this government of small business. And that is taking place at the port, where tens of thousands of parcels cannot be cleared 3 days before Christmas. And those parcels are coming in, from our information, for small people to earn an income, to earn some funds for the season, as well as individuals. So we would like to pay attention to these very important issues affecting our people. The Prime Minister, in an article in today's Guardian, states that foreign exchange must or should be used as a priority in this country. But he says that in one breath, that we must carefully prioritize our foreign exchange. But at the same time, and in the same breath, he dismisses that issue of the misuse of foreign exchange. So here we have in today's Guardian, Friday, December 22nd, 2023, on page 4, we have the Prime Minister telling us foreign exchange must be prioritized. He says that in response to the ongoing scandal surrounding the misuse and abuse of our foreign exchange at this major conglomerate, major company known as Massey. So here it is, the Prime Minister is telling us that we must spend our hard-earned dollars, US dollars that is, very carefully, and we must prioritize same. But he goes on to say that his house in Tobago is very close to Adelphi. So he too may wish to consider consulting the oracle at Delphi. So you see, the Prime Minister is making fun out of a very, very serious issue. But may I say to Trinidad and Tobago, the issue is not about Obia and Adelphi. The issue is about the misuse and abuse of our scarce foreign exchange, which belongs to every citizen of our republic. And the Prime Minister, instead of addressing that issue, he dismisses it in a very flippant manner. It is the same approach that was taken when Joanna Rambarad, the former governor of the central bank, shared with us who was utilizing our scarce foreign exchange. And what happened? He was summarily dismissed by the former president who is now the real president, she was acting president at that time, she dismissed Jawala. And then, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, the vice president of Mercy, speaking truth to power, carrying out her duty of integrity in the business that she's in, drawing to the attention of the president through a 13-page document in respect of the abuse and misuse and misgovernance taking place at Mercy. That lady, Angelique Parisot Potter, has now been sent on administrative leave by Mercy. But we have a stake in Mercy because we are shareholders in Mercy. And that is why we have raised this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to remind you that at Mercy there are some 3 state-owned companies that have interests, that have shares in Mercy. So whatever Mercy does will impact upon us as the final shareholders in Mercy. I'm talking about the people and the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. The National Insurance Board owns 20 and more % shareholding in Mercy Holdings Limited. The Unit Trust Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago has large shareholdings in Mercy. And you know Republic Bank? Let me remind the people of this country that Republic Bank has almost more than 50% shareholding in that company called Mercy. NIB alone has 26%. 26%. Then you take on board the National Investment Fund, NIF, another 16%. And then you take Corporation Seoul under the Kiko Investment Fund, another 6%. So when you tally our ownership in Republic Bank, it is close to 50%. And here it is, Republic Bank is a major stakeholder in Mercy. So hence the reason we have a direct interest in what goes on at Mercy, because we are shareholders in Mercy and we are the taxpayers. So we must have an interest in what goes on there. So when the president, according to information reaching us, he can deny it. When the president of the CEO employs a consultancy firm called Delphi, and that company apparently has been engaged in leadership training programs for the last 10 years, and we are told by the president and CEO of Mercy that they spend close to 500,000 US to 1 million US per year on training. That is what we are told. So we have a deep interest in how our scarce foreign exchange is being utilized by Massey. And therefore, we are very categorical in our position. Because of the developments at Massey as revealed by its vice president. Because of the conduct and behavior of the CEO and president of Massey. Because of the failure of the chairman of Massey to take steps to properly oversee the operations and the conduct and behavior of the president and CEO of Massey.
Today, this afternoon, the United National Congress views this matter extremely seriously. And in those circumstances, we are calling for the immediate resignation of the CEO and president of Massey, Mr. Jervis Warner, for his conduct in this matter. And we speak as shareholders of that company called Massey. We are also calling today, this afternoon, on the 22nd of December, on Mr. Robert Riley, the chairman of that company called Massey Holdings Limited, to immediately tender his resignation to the board of directors of Massey. These two individuals, instead of defending shareholders' interests in accordance with the Companies Act, which the Express in an editorial pointed out the various sections that were relevant in this matter, instead of that, they have taken unilateral action to send the whistleblower, the person who has come out in defense of the people of our country by exposing the abuse and misuse of our scarce foreign exchange. They have sent that individual on administrative leave. But the individual who has brought Delphi Consulting to Massey's compound, paying that company tens of thousands of US dollars, if not millions of US dollars, is still sitting as the president and the CEO of Massey Holdings Limited. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not fair. You know what is the name that they have now introduced? We know about necromancy. You know what the people are now saying, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters? They are now calling necromancy. Necromancy. Necromancy is now the new name for necromancy. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot support this situation that is taking place. And by the way, censusing has been happening for more than a decade. The outgoing chairman, who is the vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies, one Mr. Robert Bermudez. Mr. Robert Bermudez, you have questions to answer as well, even though you are no longer there. Because for 10 years, necromancy
in necromancy have been taking place. So you must be aware. So you must come out clean and share with the population what is your knowledge of this and how you were able to preside over this board and allowing tens of thousands, if not millions, of our scarce foreign exchange to be misused and abused by this company. But I'm not surprised at the Prime Minister's response. I want to remind people that it was in 2017. A company known as Massey Communications was sold to TSTT for some $215 million. That company, according to information reaching me, was a loss-making company. They can correct me if I'm wrong. But we bought under the chairmanship of one Mr. Emil Elias that company for some $215 million. Fast forward to today. Look at the state of TSTT since they bought that company for $215 million. It is a ghost of itself. Over 1,000 workers have been retrenched at TSTT. Ransomware attackers have invaded TSTT and put all our data, 1 million records on the dark web. That is what has happened at TSTT. And then as Mr. Warner, Gervais Warner, is taking his resignation and stepping out of Massey, we would like him to clear the air on a particular issue because it impacts on NIB. And NIB is now reeling under severe pressure where their benefits outstrip their income and there's a deficit. Their asset base is poor and they're losing. Their equity portfolio investment is underperforming. I want Massey, through its president and CEO, and its chairman, Robert Riley, to explain to Trinidad and Tobago the circumstances surrounding the sale of Plasticon, that company that produces concrete slab, not only in Trinidad, but for the Caribbean. How this company was sold at a loss and for some $17 million on your books. When we have been told by persons who can estimate properties that property was valued at close to over $100 million. We want to get clarification because I am a shareholder in NIB and NIB has 20% shares ownership in that company called Massey. So if you sell a company for 17 million and we are told the company is valued at 100 million, you have to explain to us why this gap. Is the whole company you sell? The brand name, the factory, acres of land, Tumpuna Road, land at Silats, Sanctuary Drive, a harbor. For what? 17 million? That is what I'm told. Correct me if I'm wrong. The people need answers. Let me move on. Ladies and gentlemen, we saw on the Prime Minister, in fact, somebody told me that the Prime Minister put out some statement last evening boasting that something has been signed. in Caracas. The production license to transport gas with whatever infrastructural works that have to be done, we are told by the Prime Minister, was signed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today is the 22nd of December. I want to tell Trinidad and Tobago, this government cannot be trusted. They cannot be trusted. They are comprised of a group of serial liars. They are peddlers of deception and deflection. Until you see the truth, until you see the document, you cannot believe anything that they say. So we saw the Garisobas of the cabinet holding this, a red folder, a red folder. We don't know what is in this red folder. We don't know. But we are being told that a production license was signed. And it is in this red folder. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know what was in this red folder that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries was holding in his hands. We don't know. What we do know is that the same Minister of Energy with his Prime Minister traveled to Houston, Texas recently. Traveled to Houston, Texas during the period 2015-16 to 20. And you know what they did? They negotiated new gas prices contrary to what NGC wanted. You know what they did? They agreed to a price of natural gas to EOG Resources at US $4.43 per million cubic feet of natural gas. You know what was the price before? The price before was $3.40 US per MMC FT. They got an increase of over $1 US. NGC wanted something like about $3 and a couple cents. The government, we understand, led by these two people, did what? They agreed. That is the people, those are the people that we are dealing with here. So what we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that anybody could hold up something like this. What is contained in it? What is contained in this? We don't know. We are told by the Prime Minister the Dragon license has been issued. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, produce it. Show us. Then the people will have something concrete to view. Not a red file. What is in that red file? So, against that background, the United National Congress is demanding full disclosure, full transparency, and full accountability on this production license. And by the way, it is not only just a production license, you know, members of the media. It is more than a production license. We would like the government to tell us all the agreements. There is a list of agreements that was signed, we understand, in Caracas. We want every single one to be made public, to become transparent to the people of this country, so that they can understand what is at stake here. Ladies and gentlemen, Trinidad and Tobago and the people of this country
would like to know what is the National Gas Company's exposure
in these negotiations. Do you know, members of the public, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a signature agreement, we call it a signing agreement, of $65 million
that is being demanded by the government of Venezuela?
How much, what percentage of that are we going to pay as NGC? We don't know. That is in some agreement. The government must tell the country what percentage of the signature bonus of US $65 million, which is almost $500 million, would NGC have to meet. We need information on that. Ladies and gentlemen, Venezuela invested billions of US dollars in laying down the infrastructure
in the Dragon Field. They want a refund. We understand the refund is almost $1 billion US. What percentage of that $1 billion US is the NGC being asked to carry?
We don't know. We don't know. So we are asking questions. And the only way we can get answers
is for the government to make available full disclosure and transparency of every single agreement signed in Caracas. You must make that public. These are issues that the population would like to have some answers on. And as we on this matter of the Dragon, we understand that the Dragon can only produce 300 million standard cubic feet of natural gas when it becomes operationalized. The Hibiscus platform owned by Shell can only carry 250 million standard cubic feet. The needs of Trinidad and Tobago right now to get our petrochemical complex up and running is close to 1 billion cubic feet of gas a day. So what would we be getting? 250 million standard cubic feet of gas from the Dragon field, with almost 80% going to the Atlantic LNG plant for export of LNG to Europe. So a matter of a small percentage going to the petrochemical plants at Point Lisas. So if you want to be generous, out of the 250 million cubic standard feet of gas, 200 will be going, according to our information, to the Atlantic LNG plant at Point Fortin, and only 50 million cubic feet will be going to Point Lisas. Is that going to help bring Point Lisas up to par? Would all those plants that have been closed down be reopened? Would they move from a 60% capacity to 100%? These are issues that people want to know. They want clarity on these matters. And by the way, Mr. Prime Minister, when you address your conference in a short while, tell Trinidad and Tobago what are the options facing us. Do we get a pipeline directly from the Dragon field going to Phoenix Park, which is the shorter route and might be cheaper, so that they can extract the liquids and separate the liquid from the gas,
so that they can use the liquids to produce LPG cooking gas? Or will the government give in to Shell and allow Shell to have a pipeline running straight to Point Fortin, where Shell will now be able to extract the liquids and then sell the liquids to Phoenix Park? These are questions that people want answers to and on. They are serious issues affecting the country. So, ladies and gentlemen, full transparency, full disclosure, full accountability on this dragon matter. And I want to just say in closing, before I close, you see, this government is noted for undermining the public interest, for selling out the family jewels. I believe, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that a first standard primary school student would have been able to negotiate a better deal for Trinidad and Tobago in the recently concluded Atlantic LNG negotiations. Would you believe after 30 years, all we got in renewed negotiations is 10%, and they are boasting about that? We should have gotten about 30% of Atlantic LNG. We got 10%, and they are boasting about that. And you know what is even more egregious? They extended the Atlantic LNG license for another 25 years. And they give them an option for renewal of another 10 years. That is what this government has done. They are not commercially strategic. They are not commercially focused, I should say. They are not strategic in their negotiations. And who will lose at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen? It will be you and me. Who will gain at the end of the day? It might be Shell and the multinational corporation, and not a national gas company. So we demand today full disclosure and full accountability on this matter. It is too important for our country's future. And the final area I would like to raise before taking questions from the media has to do with what I call the clear attempt by the government to undermine small business in Trinidad and Tobago. Over 157 parcels that have arrived in Trinidad and Tobago for small business people and parents who find it cheaper to shop via Amazon to buy toys for their children than to buy it in Trinidad. Their toys for their children and the small business people, the imported stuff, are now still on the port. And the Minister of Finance tells us, you know what? Guns were found. Guns were found. No evidence. He provides no evidence. He suspects that parcels that were stolen had guns in them. All of this is designed to bring doubts into the minds of people and to undermine the interests and the well-being of small businesses in particular and individuals. So, ladies and gentlemen, we condemn the Minister of Finance for attempting to blame small businessmen for importing illegal guns without showing evidence. We will condemn anyone importing illegal weapons, but we must put the security in place to deal with it. Don't use that as an excuse to frustrate the clearance of goods imported by these small businessmen. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the issues we would like to raise with you today. We'd like to bring to your attention. So, as I said, the three areas that we addressed One, the Massey fiasco. We are calling for the immediate resignation of Robert Riley as chairman and Jervis Warner as the president and CEO. Two, the Dragon gas license. Fact or fiction? Produce the evidence. And by the way, when that license, which we understand, must be signed by the Minister of Oil in Venezuela, once that is gazetted and it becomes a public document, we are demanding that the Minister of Energy translates that entire document and table it in the Parliament, because it must be gazetted in Venezuela and it becomes a public document. So make that document public by translating its contents and making it available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We call on them to do so. And finally, we call on the Minister of Finance to stop his Dolly House behavior and provide to the people, the small people, their packages so that they can earn an income for this Christmas, 3 days away, as well as to allow the children whose parents have imported toys through Amazon probably to enjoy their Christmas. These are the issues, and I thank you very much, members of the media. We are now open to any questions that members may wish to raise.
I have some questions here. This one would be for MP Indarson. Are there any laws preventing the President's husband from taking state briefs? And what is the position on this? The UNC's position on this?
In terms of the office of the President and the First Gentleman, we expect both of them to conduct themselves with the highest level of integrity in public office and ethics. And we would want to ensure that the First Gentleman understands that he has a role to play in terms of good governance, transparency, and accountability. And like all things being equal, the United National Congress has made its position very clear that there is nepotism, there is the possibility of favoritism at play, and the political ties of his relatives may also influence the awarding of state briefs. And that is why we are saying, given the importance of this office within the constitutional framework of this country and his relationship, the First Gentleman should act in the highest level and reject or no longer apply or solicit any state briefs from ministries, state enterprises, and statutory authorities in Trinidad and Tobago.
Right. Another question coming out of your presentation is that it seemed that you were making a link between the non-renewal of Deborah Thomas Felix's contract and the renewal of Alvin Valaire's contract. Are you making such a link?
Well, the whole question of appointments, we want the clarity, we want information to be provided, because as I said, the industrial court is a superior court of record. It is an arm of the established judiciary of Trinidad and Tobago. It preserves industrial relations stability, and it is very important in the context of stakeholders and so on. And we are saying, because it is the role of the opposition to raise issues, to seek clarity, to seek accountability, to hold the government to account. And we are saying, given the importance of this office and also the office of the governor of the central bank, those two offices must be like Caesar's wife, be above reproach, must be free of political interference, and if word is on the ground that the non-renewal of the contract of Deborah Thomas Felix has the shades of the dismissal of the former governor of the central bank, Jawala Rambaran, we are saying in the United National Congress that the office of the presidency needs to communicate, because we must never forget that a merit list as it relates to the appointment of the police commissioner of Trinidad and Tobago disappeared somewhere between the office of the president and parliament. A high office holder intercepted this list. The prime minister then came out. First we heard it was not him, then he came out and said it was him, and then it led to the collapse of the Police Service Commission of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why, in the context of the constitutional framework of the country and the reporting relationships, we want to ensure that there's independence of institutions, whether it is the governor of the central bank, whether it is the president of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why the United National Congress is saying that in the interest of transparency, once as the president communicates with the public, provides the clarity, trust and confidence in her office will continue to, or will emerge for the benefit of the public.
I would just like to add to my colleague's contribution here. We recognize the need to protect the guardrails of our democracy. And in seeking to protect and safeguard the guardrails of our democracy, the People's Partnership under the leadership of the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa brought an amendment to the Industrial Relations Act in 2015, and also brought an amendment to the Constitution in 2015. And the purpose of those two pieces of legislation was to protect the guardrails of our democracy. And one of the reasons, one of the steps that we took in the Constitution Amendment Bill was to ensure that the President does not have that power to appoint the President of the Industrial Court. And the Cabinet does not have the power to appoint Industrial Court judges. So in the Constitution Amendment Bill of 2015, we recommended that the President shall appoint the President, but on the advice of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. And all industrial court judges were to be appointed by the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. So what the Law Association has called for is what we have already put forward in legislative format to take effect. So the next UNC government will address this issue of the appointment of the President of the Industrial Court as well as judges to the Industrial Court. All must be done in an independent manner and must not be manipulated by the political directorate or the puppet at the house of the President in doing injustice at times to that process.
Right, I have here that the government, I believe it's the Ministry of Social Development, just issued a press release right now saying that technical errors with the Christmas food cards are being rectified, and they are blaming the error. They're putting it on First Citizens Bank. Do you have any comments to say on that, since you just spoke about it?
We reject the cop-out, the position which has been adopted by the Minister of Social Development and Family Services. The Minister has tremendous experience. The Minister belongs to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. First Citizens Bank is fully owned by the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Its board of directors are appointed by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. This is about incompetence and the lack of leadership that has been demonstrated by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, because as I said, any Prime Minister worth his salt, any cabinet worth their salt, who are concerned in terms of the members, who are concerned about the well-being of poor and vulnerable people at Christmas time, would have been proactive in terms of getting these cards into the country, doing the necessary due diligence from an IT point of view to make sure that they are working, and when the poor people go to the points of redemption, to the retail outlets and supermarkets, the cashiers and so on, they do not suffer the indignity, the shame that they had to virtually be hiding, because when confronted at the supermarket, you know how indignified a person feels when he or she picks up a full basket of goods and services, a single mother, retrenched person and so on. They go to the cashier and all the transaction, and when they swipe the card, the personnel in the supermarket comes back and tells them the card not working. You know how shame, what kind of pain, what kind of trauma, what kind of anguish they go through. And if persons go with their children and their children see what kind of trauma that their mother and father and so on are subjected to, and that is why we are saying Prime Minister Rowley and his cabinet is not about empathy and care about poor people. And Minister Cox could put out one press release today, she could put out 100 press releases before the Christmas period ends. We are saying it is incompetence, it is a lack of leadership on the part of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. When Kamala Persad-Bissessar was the Prime Minister, this would not have occurred in terms of dealing with the poor and the vulnerable.
You mentioned about the government wishing to support the release and wishing to suppress the release of the Parry report. Is there anything that can be done to force the government to release it if such a suppression is detected?
Public pressure.
We in the United National Congress has been a party that has always stood in the defense of the people, a party for peace, bread and justice. And we will mount a campaign in and out of the parliament if we have to collaborate with the families of the deceased divers and stakeholders throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago and the labor movement. The government cannot be allowed to get away with what we would call state-sanctioned murder. King's Counsel Jerome Lynch told the country that this was not an act of God and it was neither an accident. What is the government doing? What is the cabinet doing? Deliberating with a report for more than 3 weeks now. And based on their track record, that is why we are saying we do not trust them, because they have said very bluntly the explosion at Naikwan, they will not make that report public. The death into Alan Lane Rampiscoon, which was another incident at Naikwan, that is not being made public. The death of the worker at Wassa, Kern Etienne, we are not sure where that report is in terms of the Occupational Safety and Health Agency. which is mandated by the Occupational Safety and Health Act to commission inquiries, to compile reports, and the minister and the chief inspector, they have an obligation under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago to ensure that if there is wrongdoing from an industrial relations accident point of view, if there is culpability, to begin prosecution within the time period of, I think, within 6 months of having received the report, and do not allow 2 years to elapse, based on my recollection of the clauses of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. So that is why we are saying, and in addition, when the Prime Minister commissioned a report, much fanfare, 3 persons were appointed to investigate allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct of a cabinet minister, sitting cabinet minister at the Ministry of Sport. 3 persons, Jackie Wilson, Folade Matoto, and Aileen Green, attorney at law, they compiled a report. The report was sent to the office of the Attorney General. It was sent for sanitization, we were told, and that is why we are saying, based on the track record of this government, we do not trust them. Our sources are telling us that their plan is to suppress this report because the recommendations and findings may crucify friends and finances related to the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago.
This next one is for Senator Mark. You highlighted that the state is the largest shareholder in Massey. Does this qualify Massey as a state-owned company? And if not, why not?
Well, it doesn't qualify Massey as a state-owned company. What it does, it tells the citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago that it has a deep interest, that it has a deep amount of share ownership in Massey. So Massey, in carrying out its policies, must be conscious of the sizable investments by the public, by the taxpayers, by state-owned institutions. So they cannot go about carrying out their business in a whimsical